Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. And we'll kick this off with some experiences about testifying before Congress, but really testifying before Congress works. The things that you need to know to do this work, whether you're going to go to your state legislature, which I've also done, or your local city council, or your whatever. It's all the same kind of components. And that is that you are there to provide your expert advice about some type of science issue that's being discussed in the policy arena. So the first thing you need to do if you have this opportunity, which I highly recommend that you do this maybe at your local level or even involved with your state, because people get asked to testify before Congress based on a number of different factors, which we can discuss later. Maybe George will talk a little bit more about that. But the first is to get all the details about what you are going to be doing. They will send you a letter. They talk about how much time you have. It's usually very short. It's really important to be prepared and to also, as part of that, the way it works in Congress is that a committee will be having a hearing on a particular topic. There's the majority, whichever party is controlling Congress at that time. So when I did it, it was the Republicans in the House. And then there's the minority party, in that case, the Democrats, who also, they each get to decide on witnesses. The Democrats get less witnesses than the majority party. Or the majority party gets the most witnesses, the minority party gets the least number of witnesses. So, and then the staff they have internally discussed. You can also volunteer to do this if you know staff have discussed who to invite. And so they'll have the details about what you do. And it's always a very short amount of time that you testify. It's like 4 or 5 minutes, and it's in the written materials that you'll get about doing this. And you just also note that you will testify as well as the other witnesses that have been invited. So it's obviously the topic is really important. The other thing that's also important is that you prep with the staff, whether you're doing it on behalf of the majority or the minority staff, you prep with them ahead of time so they can give you kind of the lay of what's going to happen at the hearing. They also can prep you with types of questions they're going to be asked. So for example, last year I went to a committee to talk about, it was for the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Materials. This was named by the Republicans. And it was to talk about, not only to talk about regulating toxic chemicals, but to focus on the ethylene oxide regulation that was being proposed by EPA. Ethylene oxide is a medical sterilant. It's highly carcinogenic, and EPA had appropriately had proposed a rulemaking in the last administration to address emissions of ethylene oxide into communities. So you get a small amount of time to speak. So I'm going to talk about the prep for that testimony in a minute. It's really important that you adhere to the time and practice. And they have a clock up there. Clock counts down, and then they tell you you're done. And so you want to get all your important points in before your time. Now, on the other hand, you probably have a lot of things to say about this topic, so you can submit an appendix with all the additional information about the topic that you want to be distributed to the committee. The other thing is there will be time for questions. Now, the questions are based every person who attends, so you hope that your side attends. In my case, there weren't very many Democrats in the room, and hopefully they will be prepped on the kind of questions that they have. And then when they come, if you know, you can actually work with the staff to figure out, well, what kind of questions do you want to be asked or should they ask? And then during that time, you will also get time to respond to the questions that are there. The other thing I want to highly recommend is if you ever have this opportunity to do this at any level is to work with your university's congressional liaisons. So UCSF has a congressional liaison, and he helped a lot in helping prep. And so, okay, so when you do the testimony, as I said, it's very short. You should first just say who you are and why you matter. So your name and credentials really carry a lot of weight because you are, trained. I assume most people on this call have some academic degree, and for example, being a professor at a university denotes right away that you have expertise in subject matter. The other thing about your testimony is be very clear about and say in the beginning what it is that you are telling the congressional committee. Don't spend a lot of time talking about the uncertainties in the science and this and that, because they're there to make a decision, and you want to provide them the best scientific information about that decision. So, for example, when I did the testimony on ethylene oxide, the high-end statement was toxic chemicals take a measurable toll on people's health. Toxic chemicals cause health effects. And then you have a factoid. And then it was environmental regulations have cleaned up the environment and grown the economy. And then a factoid. There are health benefits from environmental regulations. And then I talked about ethylene oxide and that is a toxic carcinogen, and that the exposures are also highly impact low-income communities and communities of color. So the only other thing is that, as I said, the other side gets to have their witnesses too. So in a case where if you're in this particular case, the other side had the American Chemistry Council, the primary manufacturer of ethylene oxide, and they have a lot of people that come with them. But just you have to remember, they are not representing people, they're representing corporations and so they're not going to be talking really about the facts. They're going to be talking about generally about how this is going to cost them money. So you have to be very clear about, you're talking about the science. And that will come up in yeah. So I think and then when you end, there'll be questions. Generally, if in this case, if they have it well set up, the Republicans won't ask you any questions because they don't want to hear anything about the science. They will ask the American Chemistry Council and the people who make ethylene oxide what their opinions are to give them more time to speak. So again, it's really important to have your side prepped, and hopefully they'll ask you some good questions that can address any inaccuracies that were given by the other side, or many of the inaccuracies that are given by the other side. And you can see the testimony we have that I gave. I think it's on our website, and there's video of it. And I'll end. We'll take questions and turn it over to George and Nicole, who I'm sure have excellent more things to say about this.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Woodruff. Okay, so our next speaker today is Dr. George Thurston. So Dr. Thurston is a professor of medicine and population health at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine, and his research focused on the health impacts of outdoor air pollution. And he has extensive experience testifying regarding the human health effects of air pollution in a host of legislative and regulatory settings, especially regarding the adverse health effects of particulate matter air pollution from fossil fuel combustion.
Great. Yeah, that was very good discussion of the details. I'll try and add a little color to it, of my own. But first, I really want to say how important this is, that scientists do this, and you're going to say, well, okay, this person's been doing this for decades, and that's who they're going to choose. And this is not something no, you can do this. And it may not be at the congressional level yet, and it's important that you do, because in my experience, it makes a big difference. If you go on the web and you post something, no, that's not going to have a big impact, and there'll be 10 crazies out there who will say, I did my research, and, it's fine, but that's not making difference the way this will. There is a system, it works. And science, there was just another study done that scientists and physicians are among the most respected people. And so your opinion will matter. And it can, and I first did this as a graduate student. So, whatever I'm sure everyone here has sufficient creds that they can actually give testimony as a scientist. So please do that. That's like the most important message we can get out of this, that you are certainly capable of doing this. And okay, so how do you get does this happen? So I sort of thought before, during, after kind of thing. So most of the time, it's your professional societies. Like I belong also to the American Thoracic Society, and they have staff members like Gary Ewart who stay in touch with Congress people and know when there's a hearing, and the congressperson will reach out to them and say, do you have somebody who's an expert in this particular area? So really important to get involved with your society, your profession. We have to, we're stronger together. And so, I belong to a bunch of them, probably in the last 8 years, more than before, and have gotten involved. So that's how you get to know other researchers. It's also really good for networking and career, but also this, if you get on a committee and contribute, and then you can learn about this and make contacts and maybe be put up as that call up and they say, congressperson is looking for someone, and then the society will look who has expertise in this, and they'll promote you. So belonging to and participating in and joining committees as much as possible in your societies is really important in terms of this. But really, it can be at the as was said by Tracey, that doing it at the local level. I have given testimony in recent years about communities that were having gas pipeline put through. And it was in Virginia, predominantly Black community, historically Black community, and have had those farms since the revolution, since the Civil War ended, sorry. And they decided to put these gas pipelines through these communities, probably because they figured they get less resistance. And so I was asked to put testimony in, and I put it in. It was during the pandemic, so I didn't do it in person that time. And they, the local committee said, oh, well, okay, we approve it. Even though I had said there will be these health damages and things like, but then they appealed and went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court pointed to my testimony and said, that pipeline is rejected. And then another one, that one I traveled down to Chatham, Virginia, and it really was a very gratifying experience because the people there really appreciated it, and I gave my testimony. This time the committee said, we know where this is going. So they disapproved it right away. So, if you don't show up, then bad things, can happen. And so that's, I think, important to show up and participate in this. So my before is, if you want to find out about these opportunities, participate in your societies, and belong to more than one. But okay, during it, again, I thought that was well covered. A couple of pieces of advice in doing it. Yeah, the time is limited. They have a little thing in front of you that's really intimidating with the green, yellow, red. And that red, it's not optional. They turn off your mic. So try and, prepare ahead for that. And then put in your written testimony, you can put lots more. So what you really want are just key bullet points. And remember, your audience is not a science audience. Okay, so you got to keep it really simple. Okay. One experience. Oh, so really important. I mean, Tracey was saying, okay, you're hoping they'll come back. Now, one of the biggest weapons that I used often and effectively is this. When someone, she's right, you go and there are 6 people testifying. If the Republicans are running it, there'll be 5 that are on, saying what the Republicans want to hear. And then one of you may perhaps saying just what the science really is, kind of thing. Because they're all vested in interests that are really testifying on the other side. So, and I would raise my hand and say, may I respond to that? And they say no. But write down what that point was, that the wrong thing that person just said, write it down, And then when another person comes up who wants to hear what you say, they say, did you have something you wanted to say? Because you can't just count on them to realize and ask you a question about it. And they say, yes, I do. And then you answer it. And you can do this multiple times. Raise your hand and say, may I? And sometimes they'll say, yes, you can respond. Okay. But often they'll say no. But then someone will pick up on the fact that you want to say something on that, and then you can expound. So that's a very powerful weapon, is raising your hand and saying, may I respond? And what else? Use analogies when you're talking to them. Now, one time I was testifying before the House Commerce Committee. Henry Waxman ran it then. And well, one aside, it always bothers me that when you go in, you have to declare whatever government funding you've gotten. And you have to put that on the record and say, I was funded by this grant and so on. But people who were funded by vested interests don't have to do that. They don't have to say who funds them. So I went to Waxman, his staff beforehand, and I said, this is not fair. So he before, as the meeting started, he said, okay, these people have declared government, but what about private funding? Can each of you please, and you're under oath, say what private vested interest funding? And each one of them had to say, oh, General Motors, electric utility companies. And I thought that was, anyway, I really enjoyed being able to do that because it gives a more balanced view. Why they don't have to do this, beyond me. The other thing, the analogies. Yeah, so one time I was testifying and it was about ozone, and Yaroslav Vostel, who was a physician who worked and scientist who worked for General Motors. His entire testimony was about the fact that ozone, there are C fibers in your lungs, and the C fibers, ozone reacts with them and causes, reductions in lung function. And, but it's got the same receptor as capsaicin does in hot foods when you eat them. And so, with hot foods, spicy foods, you eat a certain amount and then you get used to it and you have to have even more and more, right, to react. And ozone reacts the same way. And it's got this TRPA1 channel, receptor and ion channel receptor. And so then the response of the lung goes down. So he drew an analogy to the eye. And he said, well, the pupil of your eye, when you go into bright sunlight, the pupil of your eye closes down and it adjusts and it adapts. And then there's no damage to your eyes. And that's what ozone is like. And his whole testimony is about, and I just raised my hand. And so they called on me and they said, did you have something to say about it? I said, yes. He's making this point about the eye, but I think that's the wrong analogy. The analogy I would draw is to the smoker. The first time they smoke, they cough, and they cough and they hack. And then after a while, they get used to it and they stop coughing. But that doesn't mean the damage doesn't continue. And ozone is like that. The damage continues and the body gives up trying to protect it, but it continues and there's a lifetime of exposure. So, and the person on the panel said, that's a good analogy. But anyway, so use those kinds of things, think about them ahead. And, because really you're trying to educate people who are not at all scientists. And so they need those kinds of analogies. And then afterwards, they will, sometimes they'll send you questions. A lot of times, if it's someone who agrees with you, then they'll ask a clarifying question. And then you can make clearer what you said in a sort of mixed up way when you were talking. You go through and read it and you're saying, no, not exactly what I was saying. So then they allow you to clarify it. Or sometimes they're, like difficult questions where One I always said, okay, ozone again. Although I spend most of my time testifying about particles, but you say ozone worsens asthma, but as ozone levels have come down, why have asthma problems gone up? So clearly they're not associated. And so then you have to get into the whole point that prevalence is increasing. So even though the effect of ozone is going down, the overall is going up. It's sort of like if you buy one stock and the overall Dow goes up, how can your one stock go down? That can't have happened. Well, yes, it can, unfortunately. So anyway, so those kinds of analogies and to try and explain things are important. But, so you're going to get those questions afterwards. But overall, it's a very positive. I find it fun. I really do, because it's sort of like a roller coaster. Roller coasters are fun, a little scary now and then, but you go up and you get to do some make some good points. So I would say it's a real positive, and especially if you're doing it in local communities or they're so appreciative, because the problem is everybody, when you go to these hearings or you go to a court, everybody has a lawyer, but not everybody has scientists. The vested interests have scientists, people who go in there and say things like, well, it's the levels are below the standards, so therefore there can be no impacts. And I say, if that's true, then if I drive the speed below the speed limit, I can never be in an accident. And so you need those kind of things to go back. But anyway, the communities are so appreciative. They really need our help. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks so much, George.
Yeah, I feel like the roller coaster analogy is very apt. So, all right, we're going to move to our last speaker on our panel, and that is Dr. Nicole Deziel, who is an associate professor of epidemiology at the Yale School of Public Health. And her research is focused on advancing her understanding of environmental exposures to chemicals. And she's testified before the Senate Budget Committee on who pays the price, the real cost of fossil fuels. Thanks, Dr. Deziel.
Okay, thank you so much to the organizers. I'm so pleased to be here and part of this really esteemed panel. So I'll try to amplify what the comments that have been made and bring maybe some different threads to this discussion. So yes, I testified once at this Senate budget oversight hearing in May 2023 on who pays the price, the real cost of fossil fuels. I've also provided some written testimony at the state level. So I thought I would organize my remarks to the why, some of the how, and then some of the what. And again, I'll try to add to what's already been said. So I think George and Tracey already talked about kind of the importance of this. So for me, I think this is really the opportunity to contribute to the public discourse. So you really, in my case, it was a budget committee hearing, but I got to bring in public health and environmental health and how these costs to society are not often figured into our calculations. And it's really a tremendous opportunity. Like, when else are you going to have 10 senators sitting in a room, and for your 5 or 10 minutes, you have to be heard. So it's your chance to speak truth to power. And then the audience is not just the senators, because it is live streamed, it's recorded, it's posted online. As was already said, your written materials are posted and are available. And I've directed different organizations to some of my testimony, and other organizations working at the state level, I know they have used some of my written testimony in some of their efforts. So these can be useful resources that contribute to the public record, even beyond just your 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah, and as George kind of said, I really view this as sort of a civic responsibility and a very solemn responsibility. A lot of people who have no expertise have the microphone, and you have the expertise, you have the training, you have experience. And I do think the American people communities, they all deserve access to information and experts. So it's a chance to highlight evidence and bring evidence to policies. And then just personally, I also thought it was kind of fun. It's really fascinating to get a window into policy making, and then just getting invited to the Capitol. It's so beautiful. It's so historical. The conference room I was in, the architecture was so beautiful, and you could just feel the history and the power, and to be a part of that, I felt was a real honor that I took very seriously. So that's my why. And then the how, I think, in addition to the scientific societies, I'm actually not sure how my name got to the attention of the staffers, but congressional staff, lobbyists, different organizations can recommend witnesses. And I will say the year that I was contacted, it was my sabbatical year, and I had really made an effort to do a lot of outreach. So I and others had helped develop an evidence base regarding fracking and health effects of oil and gas extraction. And I really believe strongly that the evidence showed that we, urgently needed stronger public health protection. So I was doing a lot more media outreach, writing commentaries, just kind of putting myself out there, talking to organizations. So I'm not sure if that contributed, but that was kind of when I got invited to speak about this topic. So then the what, I think we've heard a bit about, you have the written testimony. You do have to provide that 24 hours in advance, and it gets posted. That also means before you give your oral testimony, you can go read the testimony of the other witnesses. And that might also give you some insights onto how the discussion might go. We heard about those green, yellow, red lights. So I definitely agree with practicing, making sure you have your 5 minutes. Just a couple other things too. There's a lot of hustle and bustle to be prepared for. So members, they might be taking a vote somewhere. So then they're coming in, their staff's coming in and out, passing notes, so just you're just want to be calm and composed and give your remarks. And, don't worry if there's a lot of movement and people coming in and out and things like that. Yeah, I think for your oral testimony, as was already said, keeping it low on jargon, having 3 key points that you really want to emphasize, and doing the preparation is called a murder board. If you can get the staffers to ask you these aggressive questions so that you can be most prepared, and you can even suggest questions that they could potentially ask you, but it really helps you to polish your argument and figure out your responses. And just a little more about the questions, that I got questions about the topic of fossil fuels, but then you can also be prepared to talk about just general questions that shed doubt on the scientific process, and it may be something like, oh, well, you found that fracking causes cancer in this study, but this other study was null. So, isn't the evidence just all over the place? Or, isn't all science corrupt and you could just make the data say whatever you want? So things like that. I actually got asked about confounding, the peer review process. So these are all questions you're well equipped to handle. Those weren't the ones I exactly prepared for, but we've been preparing our whole careers for those types of questions. And I recommend kind of, not getting caught up in any kind of grandstanding. Some of these senators, they have their own agenda. They have a point they want to make. They may want to try to get you go down a path that's outside the scope of your expertise. And I would say, we're not there to engage in that. We're there to share evidence. We're not there to go viral or, come up with some catchy retort. We are just there to provide scientific information to help inform policies. Yeah, so I think I will leave it at that and leave it for questions now.
Okay, thank you all so much. So now we're gonna, start taking questions and open the floor. So feel free to either put your questions in the chat, and we'll work on moderating those, or raise your hand. And when we call on you, feel free to unmute and turn your camera on if you'd like, and and join the discussion.
And I noticed that we did already get one question. This is from Ashley. The question is, how much notice do they typically give you before a hearing to let you know that you'll be called to testify?
That can vary. I was just looking back at the one I did, it was last year. They had 5 days, 4 days a week. Sometimes they know ahead of time that they're planning on a hearing. They don't know the exact date or when they're going to ask you. So sometimes you get a little bit, I don't know, you guys, how long you guys got, but sometimes it's really short. But you already, like I said, the speakers already said, you already know that they're asking you because you're an expert in the topic. So it's not that's not the hard part about prepping. The hard part about prepping is getting all your thoughts organized into 4 minutes and being very clear. No wishy-washy language in a way that people understand about what you want them to know.
Yeah, I think I maybe had 2 weeks notice, and some other things I didn't know about was you have to pay for your own way. So I went, I'm in New Haven, so I took a train to Washington, DC. I got actually I stayed with a friend, but they don't pay for this, so you're paying for it. Yeah, I think I had about 2 weeks, which was, it's good for me to be able to do the murder board. And also, I talked with other colleagues, like Tracey recommended at the Yale office, didn't really have a lot of resources, but I had colleagues that I talked to, to get ready. And I would certainly I would be willing to do any kind of murder board for anyone here on the call if they, if they're looking for someone to bounce ideas off of.
Thank you. Yes, Judith, we see you've got your hand up.
Thanks so much. This is really helpful. I'm slowly getting involved with some legislation on a state level, which has been a really interesting process, and I'll probably be testifying in April, so this is really helpful. Can you talk a little bit about preparing written materials and what is most useful, the length of the written testimony? That'd be helpful.
Which state are you in?
I live in Maine.
Maine.
Yeah, so they're working on standardizing water and air standards to the federal level.
Well, I say I've testified maybe was it last? Yeah, I guess it is last year because it's only January. For the California State Legislature, and in those cases, often I don't know what Georgie or Nicole, but in that case, the legislation was co-sponsored by public health group, environmental public health group, breast cancer prevention partners. And so I really recommend working with that group who can provide you a lot of expertise. And then the bills, I don't know how it works in Maine, but in California, they start off with a bill, and there's like a short period of time when it's going to march through the legislature, and they've already worked a lot with the staff, and they have a lot of relationships with the staff. So the groups that are working the issue are typically I think Maine actually has a very good group there, are typically pretty familiar with kind of the details of what they need and the things to focus on for the testimony. So the written testimony, it can be as long as you want, but if you want them to read it, it probably should be succinct and have high level points.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks.
I have a question. My question is, how have you responded to questions that you might have gotten that you feel like are really kind of like undermining some of the science, and just thinking that like a lot of the environmental work is mixed, even though it does seem like in many ways there is kind of like a clear direction of effect, but sometimes like there doesn't reach statistical significance. How have you tried to like combat some of those things?
I mean, I don't recall anybody but going after that particular issue with me. But I think an important thing to remember is that not just because something is not statistically significant doesn't mean that it's not happening. It just means probably, your study's underpowered. Well, I take it back. I did get a question, because there was a study that was done, I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it was like cities across the United States for Health Effects Institute. And when they looked at PM10, particular matter less than 10 micrometers, so this is going back about 20 years, but most of the cities were statistically non-significant. I think New York was significant, and maybe LA, but most of them, but then when you look collectively at them, the overall effect was statistically significant, clearly statistic. So they were saying, well, why are most cities it's not significant, and that, and so I discussed the fact that the effect, you're not saying it's not there, you're saying you didn't have enough power to detect it. And so that is, it's a little obscure of a thing, but I mean, that also gets into, why does the standard keep going down? That's one of the questions you get. Why do the standards keep getting more? And the answer is basically, again, power, that as we make progress, then more communities are living at lower levels. And then we have enough people to have enough power to see the effect at that level. Whereas before that, we couldn't see it because there weren't enough people living at lower levels to detect it. So yeah, that's an answer to that question.
What's your analogy for statistical power, George? Well, that's like, I mean, it's really like if you have 10 people and your risk is 10%, that's one person gets sick, and that's just kind of random that happens or doesn't happen. But I think another thing,
maybe a telescope, sometimes, like that phenomenon of all the planets lining up. I could go out there and view, I couldn't see them all. But if I had a telescope, if I had enough power, visual, I could see
telescope, that's a
them
good one, George.
Huh?
That's a good one.
Okay, thanks.
Can I have oh, go ahead, Tracy.
well, I just want to say, first of all, there's a little bit of kabuki theater in this situation, right? Like they're trying to make their point. I think George's point about raising your hand is really excellent. So when we did ethylene oxide, they like brought out these, was so funny, actually. They brought out these pictures of these yellow needles, the syringes, and they're like, look at this, like somehow a yellow syringe is dirty. That was like a whole other situation I didn't get into, but the point being that if you did, we didn't have ethylene oxide, we'd have all these yellow syringes, and everyone would get sick. So, I mean, they're trying to make these points that are not actually the real point. That is what's going on, which is, there's ways to, ethylene oxide is toxic and communities are exposed, and, there's other technologies, and you don't have to like off gas it everywhere and et cetera. So I think that's one thing. The other thing about your question about the uncertainty is, there's a couple things. One is just don't go down the rabbit hole, right? First of all, usually you're testifying something that an authoritative body like the state of California or WHO, IARC, or EPA has already said it's toxic. Sure, whatever. That whole thing about an individual study is just random. This is the other value. I know it's like people know we do work on systematic reviews. The value of saying we have an authoritative systematic review that shows clearly that this thing is this level of competence and whatever the health effect is. So I wouldn't, unless they're really they're not really doing that to ask the question about the science. They're doing it to get you to say the science is uncertain, therefore we shouldn't do anything about it. And then the ancillary thing about this is, yeah, sure, but do you want your child exposed to this chemical, even if the chance is 60% that it might kill them? I mean, pretty much everyone has the same answer to that question, which is no, unless, I guess,
Yeah. Okay, so I have three thoughts. I'll go through quickly. I mean, one is, one way I've chosen to answer this is that, we conduct studies in different populations at different times in different places. So of course, two studies are not going to be identical, but when we look at the body of evidence, they point to this, this chemical it causes adverse birth outcomes or something like that. So we're talking about the weight of evidence, not like picking a study here and there. And then, yeah, to Tracey's point about these theatrics, also for my my testimony, which is about fossil fuels and fracking, they brought out these pictures, big, easels with pictures of children mining precious earth metals, and saying, but look at this, this is what renewables are, and again, there's like an element, there's a performative element, but of course there's an element of truth here that we need to have a responsible energy transition. But, again, it's like setting up this false choice. It's not, it's like logical fallacies. So again, just kind of bringing it back to your key points. And then I really liked Tracey's last point, which was some advice I got as well, is you could always answer a question with a question. Like, I forgot how Tracey said it, but it's not, would you still want your kid to be exposed, or shouldn't we be, don't we want policies that protect, fence line communities, something like that. So you can always do that. It comes across maybe a little softer, but it's also a way to like turn it back on the questioners.
Right, but I do think you have to get, because their thing is, they're like, oh, we have to be 100% sure before we make a decision. And it's like, you're not 100% sure about do you go to the airport exactly at the right amount of time? No, you always go with a pad or whatever the analogy is. You wear your seat, like George said, you wear your seatbelt, even though most of the time you're not going to get in a crash, of course, because should the thing happen, it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
I would say
uncertainty is not doubt. That's an
Right,
important point to
right,
make. Uncertainty
right.
is not doubt.
Right. Also would caution against, I know you said the term weight of evidence, but that is like, that is what they use all the time. So I would try and not get into that because it's not, they've kind of co-opted that term, but anyway, that's just a subtlety.
Okay.
But I think the other point too about having like you were saying, Nicole, like having other people is not just necessarily your congressional, but other people in your society or other colleagues, ISEE, whatever. Sue Fenton gave testimony on PFAS, and she basically is the director of one of the NIEHS core infrastructure P30 grants, and she just emailed all her colleagues and asked them to provide advice or reached out. I think that's really important.
That actually was going to be one of my questions is, what are good ways to, prepare for these? I mean, I think, you guys all alluded to the fact that a lot of these questions we've been addressing in other ways as, as scientists when we publish our papers. But, certainly the tone and, types of questioning might be slightly different. And so I was curious about other ways, that you feel like you can prepare. And it certainly sounds like something that as you continue to do it, it's something that you get better at doing. So I don't know if you have any other suggestions to help people feel more comfortable doing this, because I think it is something that takes a bit of a leap of, confidence to do.
I don't know.
Well,
Say yes. Say yes when people ask
yeah,
you.
well, yeah. Practice. It's all about practice. And I think, right, Nicole, George, I don't know if George, he just is so able to, he came up with that amazing analogy about the telescope right there, see, but I think the other thing is you can practice in your own, your own research groups, with your colleagues. I think that is the key. I mean, I think when I was doing the ethylene oxide, because of the whole, red light situation, we were like removing 5 words or something and trying to squish everything. Same thing the one I did in California was on removing DHP from IV and other medical devices. It's the same thing. You gotta kind of rework. And sometimes at the last minute, this didn't happen when I went to Congress, but at the phthalates one, you hear what the other side is saying and you can adjust your testimony to address that point in your testimony. Depending. Anyway, sorry, that was a distraction. I don't know if you guys had anything else to say about that, but it's really like talking to other people and practicing, just like you would for a job talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought the point Nicole made about the fact that their testimony is available to, I've never done that. I have to admit, I've never gone and read what they're going to say. So that, thank you. I've learned something today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and also as the newest person who did it, yeah, you can also go to that committee and watch, like I watched a few of the previous hearings, again, just to get a sense of the tenor, the tone, the types of questions, so you can go watch George and Tracy in their hearings, or watch the subcommittee hearings, and yeah, practice. I'm sure there's other people who have done it, who can do the murder board with you. And then I think also just all our conversations with the media, talking to the general public, the more we're out there talking about these issues, it just helps us communicate better. I mean, I think as scientists, it's important for us to be, communicating our findings in as many venues as possible. So it all helps.
Yeah. I think also, reaching out to your congressperson or your senator, staff. Oh, I was going to say, on these issues, the staff are the congressman. The staff are the senator. You don't really want to talk to the senator or the congressman necessarily, because the questions that they read are made up by the staff, and when you talk, so don't, some people go there and say, oh, I want to talk to the congressman. I don't want to talk to the staff person. No, you want to talk to that staff person, because they're the knowledge. They're writing the material, because the senators or congressmen can't know all this stuff. That's why they have staff to prepare them and to come up with positions and things to say. And so that's, and then when you work with them, then they invite you to do things, so if there's, you can contact them and say, if there's anything, an issue that you need help on, I'd be, and again, talking to the staff, I'd be glad to help. Like my senator happened to be Hillary Clinton. So, I worked with her to some extent, and then she started inviting me to give testimony on things. We did events like on Earth Day together and things like that. So I don't know, my wife used to say when she worked in Washington, volunteer to career. And that's a lot of what we do. You're not going to get paid, but you will make a difference.
You get paid in good feelings, George.
I hope so. Yeah, I do. I did. I mean, you're going to, afterwards, you're going to say, ooh, I should have said this. I mean, that's inevitable, right?
Yeah.
But hopefully, you have more things that you're glad you said, and the result pays off. And so I think it's worth it. It's been really gratifying, I would say, over the years that I've done this, that it's taking the science and translating it into action. It doesn't do any good if it's on the internet or on a shelf somewhere or something, really, okay, maybe it'll help you get promoted or something, but in terms of society, you've got to take, my mother used to say from the Bible, don't hide your light under a bushel basket. It's from the Bible. And, you really got to take your work and get it out there and make it alive, and especially our field. I mean, it's just so relevant to everybody's lives. If you were doing theoretical molecular stuff, it is important, but it's a lot harder to translate to the public, and to political and, legislative and things. And our stuff is very translatable to the public and to decision making. So the shame would be to have that platform and not use it. And unfortunately, so many scientists and other public health people don't use the platform that they have, the voice that they have.
Yeah, exactly. And if we don't speak up, someone else will, who doesn't have the credentials or the expertise or the preparation. So yeah.
There's one more thing that I want to say about this, which I totally agree. And also, the public has invested in your education, so it's your responsibility to give back to what they have invested in, because you are the expert. You, as George and Nicole said, you know this way better than anybody else in the room does. just be careful when you're there not to endorse any legislation that is illegal, probably from your university. You can talk about the implications of things that happen. And I say this now because it could be that I don't know if there's going to be more scrutiny, but possibly. So I would just, I think that's an important caveat. You're there to provide information about the science, the implications of policies and how that, the science and what the policy will do in terms of its impacts on people and health, but don't endorse legislation.
Yeah, I never say, like when I testify about facilities like coal-fired power plants, I never say, oh, you should shut this down, or you should.
Well, you could say that. You could say if you shut it down,
I
this is
don't.
what's
I
gonna
just say,
happen.
okay, if you do this, this will happen. And I lay out the plan.
I'm just saying, no, if they were considering a bill like HR, blah, 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 you shouldn't say, oh, and I think this means you should endorse this bill. Like that would be, I just
try and lay out the facts. I think as scientists, we're most comfortable with that rather than, just saying, that's, I think, one of the problems. People say, well, I don't want to, I'll come across as biased or something. But I think it is possible, very possible, to just lay out the facts. The facts speak for themselves a lot of times.
exactly.
And that's what you have to do when you're testifying. Anyway, so worth doing, and it's a good experience to do it, and it's satisfying. And just not enough scientists do it. We're not trained to. Nothing in our education says this is how you do these things. Really, it's unfortunate. I mean, the same problem with physicians, by the way. I mean, I deal with this. The physicians don't learn anything about environment stuff because it's not on their medical exams. So I offer a class in this, and hardly any of them take it in environmental health. I think the ones who take it love it, but most don't take it because it's not on there. And I've fought to get questions on the medical exams and worked through ATS, but we haven't been able to. People say everybody wants a question on those exams. And so if somebody knows how to do that, that would be a big help, because physicians really should be trained in upstream influences like environmental health, rather than just dealing with the fallout. I'm off the subject, aren't I?
Well, I think on that note, we're only a few minutes to 2:00 Eastern time here. So I think let's go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for spending an hour with us and for sharing your insights. This was, very helpful. And I'm feeling inspired to now go email my Congress people and say, I want to help. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today.